Picture book videos have become something of a lost art in the modern age. Indeed, in a world of AI generation, Fiverr and self-help videos to aid in getting first-time animators up and off the ground, the very concept of a picture book video seems kind of outmoded by contrast. And I think that's really a bit of a shame. What is a picture book video? Well, it's a simple premise on a high level, but has a long-standing history dating back to as early as the 1930s. Probably even before that in one format or another. A picture book video is, in essence, exactly what it suggests on the tin. Someone has taken a kid's picture book and presented it in a non-book format, here specifically presented as a very minimalist video with no text and narration to help enhance the experience. It's not quite animation, but it's more engaging than just a book. Essentially, it's for two kinds of parent, the kind who go all in and buy the book and the videotape and sit and read along and watch along with their kid to help create a nurturing and enriching environment, and parents who are either too busy or just don't care to sit and read to their kid but want their kid to have an experience of being read to. No shame, we're all busy folks these days. In reality, this type of presentation really began in its crudest form with the advent of home projection in the mid to late 30s, when several children's stories were adapted to slides that could be projected onto a big screen, with an accompanying 78 or 33 vinyl record that would read along the words on screen. This early attempt tended to be with generic fairy tales or nursery stories, but by the 40s and 50s they developed into much more sophisticated and branded opportunities. Particularly from the Disney Company, who released several Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck stories on both slide projector and 8mm film for home projection alongside accompanying records to provide narration or sound effects. By the late 60s and 70s, the projectors were still a thing, but the age of plastic made it even easier for projectors to be manufactured for cheaper and for self-contained units to be created, where the sound and slides or video were presented all on a single cartridge that could be loaded straight into the branded projector. These two format styles lasted well into the early 90s. Even TV got in on the act, in the UK at least, with a lot of children's television programmes from the mid-50s through to the late 70s featuring generic children's stories and folk tales with narration, illustrated with minimal movements and music. But in the 80s, videotape really came into its own after a decade or two of being considered a high-budget luxury item. The ability to manufacture tape stock became significantly cheaper in the mid-1980s, and with it, the idea of the picture book video really reached its peak. The idea was simple enough. By the mid-80s, video effects and video editing had reached a point where digital effects and movements could be handled with relative ease. This was also the start of the everything that can make money should make money period of Reaganomics, so authors for children's books began to be hit up asking if they'd like a direct-to-video adaptation of their much-beloved children's books. And quite a few said yes. And the results? Well, it varied from company to company. Some companies would literally just scan the picture book's images, hire some guy to do the narration, and do snazzy window movie maker style transitions to move from image to image as if they were pages turning in a book. Titles, credits, 22 minutes long, £15 retail, bosh. Others would actually go a bit further, as is the case with today's review, Santabear's First Christmas, which was originally a picture book written by a copywriter for the shopping chain Hudson's, Barbara Reed, and released on January 1st, 1986. Well, roughly 10 months after the book came out, FHE, Family Home Entertainment, a fairly well-known children's VHS distribution and media company, reached out to Hudson's to ask about adapting this Santabear book for their distribution line, which they agreed. They then brought in a man named Thomas Roberts to adapt the picture book to better fit TV and video standards, story and dialogue-wise, before bringing back the book's original illustrator H.B. Lewis to create some new illustrations and additional frames to help smooth over the gaps in the story and to add some small movement to more important moments in the story. Then, through the power of digital editing, they basically did what had been possible since the 60s and 70s and just slowly zoomed and moved around a still of the illustration, barring 2 to 3 moments where they clearly cropped a character out of one illustration and put them into the background of another to fill in a gap in the story where they didn't want to pay more to the illustrator. and one instance where they wanted to show it was snowing, at which point they utilised a very shoddy digitally generated snow effect. For 1986, this was pretty Scanner's head exploding level impressive, but yeah, it's made all the funnier really when the VHS box for this release in big letters proudly announces that the special is fully animated, which, if digital moves over a still image count as fully animated, then you're both pedantic and very easily impressed. The plot is pretty faithful to the book and follows the story of Snowy the bear, a small bear cub living with his family out in the most northernly north part of the world, and his adventure that he had last Christmas in which he earned the name Santabear. At which point we flash back to December the previous year, and Snowy's family are catching fish out on the ice when a sheet breaks, separating Snowy from his family. While they desperately try to rescue him, the tides are just too strong and Snowy gets swept out to sea. While riding the shrinking piece of ice, he loses all his food in the process, and battling torrid waves and high winds, he's eventually lifted clean out of the water before smashing down on land. Snowy isn't entirely sure where he is, but there seems to be some creatures surrounding him with long, terrifying arms and, well, he's just a little guy. He only knows sleep, eat fish and hugs from his family, so he gets scared. That is until a figure emerges out of the darkness and tries to find out what Snowy is doing there and if there's any way she can help. Her name is Marie, and she lives in a cabin not too far away from where Snowy's landed. She tells him the tall figures are trees, that they can't move and certainly aren't going to cause any trouble, before telling Snowy that she wants him to be his friend and asking if he'd like to go back to her home with her. Snowy agrees enthusiastically, and back at the cabin Marie lights a fire which at first scares the bear until he realises that it's warm and can be used to cook great food. Following a brief montage of Marie introducing Bear to human life, her grandfather returns from somewhere and greets Snowy equally enthusiastically. The gang all sit down for food together and Bear can't understand why the fish tastes so weird over here. To which Marie informs him that it's porridge with a bit of sugar, some fruits and a lot of nuts. As time goes by, Bear and Marie become great friends, with Marie introducing Bear to everything from dancing to baking and, most importantly, to Christmas, and all the magic that can be found there within. Bear learns all about Santa and the reindeers, and as Christmas Day gets closer, Snowy even goes out with Marie to help get supplies in for the big day, where he meets and greets the other woodland animals and even befriends a pack of brown bears who become his new play buddies whenever Marie and her grandfather have to go out together. But Snowy still misses his family and desperately wants to go home, and his hope is that Santa will be able to give him the gift of his family back. So, when Christmas Eve finally arrives, Snowy is positively brimming with cheer and hopefulness. But disaster strikes, as Marie's grandfather has been taken gravely ill after falling into a frozen lake. They need the cabin to stay warm, both to help Marie's grandfather recover and to allow Marie to make some hot soup for them. But they're almost out of firewood, and Marie can't leave her grandfather in case he becomes really sick. So, Bear bravely offers to head out into the big woods to find firewood and hopefully save Marie's grandfather. In quite the spirited adventure for kids young, old and slightly weepy adults on their fourth brandy, will Snowy find the firewood in time? Will Santa be able to grant Snowy his Christmas wish to be reunited with his family? And hey, some honey, fruits, nuts and sugar porridge sounds pretty incredible right now, I'm not going to lie. All this and more will be answered if you check out Santabear's First Christmas. And hey, I'm going to be honest with you here, I didn't even know this special existed until I was locking in the episodes for this season. You see, I was originally going to be covering the much more well-known Santabear's High-Flying Adventure, which had some heavy marketing shift behind it in 1987 and 1988. But then, when researching into that film, I found out that it was actually intended as a sequel to this VHS special or picture book movie. So I figured if I'm going to do this properly, I should probably see how it all started. And you know what? It's a little bit saccharine-y, but it gave me the warm fuzzies. And given that I don't even want to look out of the window much these days, let alone turn on the TV, that's got to count for something. So the original picture book is a pretty cuddly affair, the kind of book that you'd maybe keep stored with the Christmas ornaments, and every year when little John or Daisy May are tiny kids, you'd pull the book out, cuddle up with them and read it to them, doing the voices, showing the pictures. It's supposed to be a whole bonding thing that gives them some Christmas wonderment and you the warm-hearted nostalgic sensation of Christmas wonderment from a third-person perspective. If I'm being picky, I think this book would have a short shelf life. I don't know if a kid much past 6 would be clamouring to hear the adventures of Santabear, but I could easily see a kid aged 2 to 5 eating this stuff right up. And I'm sure that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of kids who have fond memories of this book and spending time with their parents reading it. The VHS adaptation isn't that much different. I could see it complementing or enhancing that time if the kid had the book to begin with, or maybe one of the Santabear toys that were first manufactured in 1985. But similarly to the picture book, I can't really see a kid much older than 6 gleefully sitting down to watch effectively a 22-minute digital slideshow with narration. Especially not in 2025. I think very young kids may be a captive audience, but this up against the iPad, it's no contest. And that's a shame, really. I'll say this from the top, this isn't the most incredible adaptation in the world. It feels almost like a telesnap reconstruction of the actual animated version we should have gotten. But I think the jump from page to screen is largely a successful one. The pacing is nice and quick, there isn't much flab to be cut, if any, the act structuring is solid. I think the only issue I have from a plotting perspective, and this is something I think will largely make sense to my UK audience, is that tonally, this special feels a bit like Raymond Briggs' The Snowman. Only, instead of the absolutely heart-crushing finale and the sentient killer snowman, it's just that handful of scenes where the snowman comes to life and starts titting about in the kid's house for 5 to 8 minutes before they fly off to Snowman Land, but extended to 22 minutes. That's what I'm referring to when I say this feels saccharine. They don't really offer Bear much of a contrast. There's one sad moment where he's initially lost in the woods and one stoic moment in the third act where he's trying to save Marie's grandfather, but they literally occupy 30 seconds or less of the 22-minute story. And then it's sunshines and tap dancing till the end credits. I appreciate this is for very young children, but so is The Snowman. And I've seen grown adults openly weeping at the end of that film, let alone small children. I kind of wish that when they'd adapted this from the book, they'd maybe given just a little bit more towards creating a sense of contrast. Something to make the good times feel that bit better, and the bad times that bit more serious. Because, as it stands, it has a heavy gloss on it for the full runtime that just acted like a barrier to me fully embracing this piece. I will say that tonally it does handle heartwarming very well. There were several moments where I openly awed at it, and it definitely does fill you up with the Christmas fuzzies, but, as we'll get onto shortly, despite this being a fairly decent adaptation, what it does well here, it kind of disappoints in other areas. So this special began life as a picture book written by Barbara Reed, a copywriter with several children's books and some non-fiction pieces under her belt. I don't know how successful or well-known Santabear is to an international audience, but here in the UK he's about as famous as something not very famous at all. Yeah. The book was adapted by Thomas Roberts, who I'm assuming was a gun for hire because this was his only writing credit and I can't find anything else about him online. With the art and voice direction for the piece being curated and directed by Mark Sotnick, who has 4 directing credits between 1985 and 1987, mainly for similarly styled picture book to VHS exclusives. But he's really more of a producer, with 38 credits to his name there, mainly for a series called Rabbit Ears. And it's with the art direction that we kind of hit our first problem. And before I get into the nitty-gritty of it all, I just want to take a minute to say H.B. Lewis's illustrations, we're going to put them in a little bubble outside of this conversation because to me, they're perfect. Adorable and cute captures in time of Snowy's adventures. If I could get prints of them, I absolutely would. Their work is incredible and really captures a comfy, cosy vibe that may feel a little Hallmark greetings card generic to some, but for me, I loved it. Now my issue with the art direction here is just simply that this feels a bit like the cheap way to churn out a product quickly and still try to charge full retail. This had one brief airing on television, mainly to promote the VHS tape, and then it was literally only available on VHS from there. It's 23 minutes long in total, including extended titles and credits, and while the art itself is great, it's literally just digital moves, zooms and transitions for the full runtime, and not much else. At most, they either mirrored some illustrations or got H.B. Lewis to draw a few additional frames to give the illusion of movement via crossfades. But there's no getting away from the fact that this feels painfully like a what's the least we can pay to maximise a return job. And that's a real shame, as I feel if they took this art style, reworked the book into a more televisual linear narrative and actually bothered to fluidly animate it in the style of the book, this could have probably been one of the greatest Christmas specials ever released. It'd shit on a Charlie Brown Christmas, that's for sure. And I'm not even using hyperbole. The biggest failure this film has is trying to do so little to try and actually bring it alive. Now, some people would argue I should be grateful we have the special at all, as it could have just as easily sat on a shelf in a library somewhere rotting away. But fuck that, honestly. Someone out there, please remake this as an actual TV special, 20 minutes, decently animated, and I guarantee you it will print money. As such, there isn't really much of a cine to talk about either, as it's just still images enhanced with digital moves, and those moves are fine for the most part, but as above, I just feel like this was kind of a bare minimum gig. Something they'd probably get the in-house apprentice to do in between shifts to build character. The edits are fluid enough, the style is good enough, but that's all this is visually. Good enough. Mercifully, the performances, or really that should be performer, does lift this quite considerably, as Kelly McGillis is the only cast member here as the narrator, and she's warm and friendly and does voices, and it all comes across as charming in a very American way. She's like the mahogany furniture of narrations. I feel safe, comfortable and stable when I hear her perform. She does a really good job, honestly. Nothing absolutely mind-meltingly good, but she's absolutely good enough. And finally, the soundtrack. And it's all acoustic, guitar-y, folky sounding, earthy tunes from start to finish. I liked it. It again fed into that sense of nostalgia and comfort that isn't really done these days. It was used well enough throughout the piece, it really helped bring up the more touching or fun moments, and it felt original and distinct for this. I really liked it, honestly. It's not the most Christmassy sounding thing in the world, but it works. Santabear's First Christmas had its premiere on ABC as a weekend special on November 22nd, 1986, and a couple of weeks after that it was released on VHS by Family Home Entertainment, FHE, and after that, it pretty much disappeared from what I can see. It wasn't repeated, no DVD, no Blu-ray, it isn't on streaming. In fact, for this review I had to use a rip-off of YouTube, and even that is the only video of its kind, and that was uploaded 3 years ago. So, up until that point, this special literally could only be watched if you hunted down a copy of the original tape, or if you taped it off the television back in 1986, and that isn't an easy feat in the year of our Lord 2025. As an aside, things do seem to get a bit muddied in the world of Santabear, because while Santabear's First Christmas as a book was released on January 1st, 1986, that isn't the beginning of the story, as Santabear itself began the year prior in Detroit in 1985. The Dayton Hudson Santabear was launched as a gimmick in 1985 by shopping chain Hudson's as a way to get more customers through the door. The idea being that they were limited edition and only available at Christmas, the tradition ran every year from 1985 until it was retired in 2007. But a limited edition run of bears has been handled via pop-up stores in Minneapolis once again since 2022. So, if you're looking for your own Santabear, there you go. All in all, I liked what Santabear's First Christmas was about. I just wish it gave me a bit more. While the illustrations were delightful, the narration charming, the music delightful, and the script itself largely full of Christmas cheer, it's very difficult to not look at this and feel like they were really trying to squeeze as much juice out of parents as they could for as little time put in as possible. I don't think this one's ultimately worth checking out, not unless you're really in the need of a festive spirit injection, but I did find it charming, and I think that if you have very young kids they'd probably quite enjoy it too. I could maybe see myself revisiting this one in the future, but I'd have to be in a major festive slump to do so.